We're here in the centre of town and we're going to be exploring the corridors of a building which has a fascinating history, one in fact which started in the early 1800s. The City Hall behind me houses the Mayor's Parlour and the Mario Fillinson National Art Gallery, and this is where our focus lies today, on Gibraltar's art and its art history. We're going to be featuring some of those treasures that form part of the Gibraltar Government Art Collection. We'll be joined by some interesting guests as well, who have their own fascinating story to tell too. Paulette, lovely to have you here with us today. Obviously we're standing in a building in the National Gallery which takes the name of your dad. I mean, we know that Mario really campaigned to have the National Gallery, and it was something that finally came to fruition back in 2015. He was obviously very proud of that. So for yourself to be standing here, obviously a few months, after he passed away, I mean, how are you feeling at the moment? No doubt bittersweet.
Very proud, because he achieved his lifelong ambition of having a National Gallery, which was one of the poignant thing in his rebellious self. So that's amazing. And obviously we have this lovely heritage, and we can always look back on his lovely work together with his other former mentors and artists as well. So I think it's a privilege to be here.
I think with Mario, I mean, such a prolific artist, a man who dedicated his whole life to his passion, to his art. Later in the year, we are going to be changing things around, so he's going to be taking more of a prominent position perhaps in this gallery, and we'll be able to bring out some of the work we have as well in the archives and showing that, because that's what it's about really. So let's take a walk, because this is the idea that we're having to bring art to people at home at the moment. So Paulette, just coming here to appreciate some of your dad's earlier works, you were telling me these particular sketches, the one in charcoal, were done when you were about 6 or 7, is that right?
That's right. And that's when he went to the Slade School of Art. So that for him was another very important milestone in his life, because he'd achieved actually going to study art, which is something he'd longed for all his younger life. And these are the studies of nudes and still lifes in the actual Slade School of Art. And these serve as sketches to then later work in actual oils, and obviously a bigger size as well.
How much of an impact would you say this time in the UK actually had for him, perhaps being exposed to other artists and different styles and so on?
Well, he was under the tuition of Frank Arbach and Peter Prendergast, so for him those names were names that he had read about, and then, lo and behold, he was actually in a tutorial or in a class with these artists, so that for him was like unbelievable. And obviously being in London and visiting galleries, which he did always, we kept maybe going back to the National Gallery again and again. I remember my mum saying, "We're here again," and she didn't understand that we could revisit and restudy and connect with whatever he was doing at the present time, whether he was studying more Matisse or Cézanne or Picasso, and delving really deeply into all that study.
From these sketches to then his more abstract work, which always had that sort of cubist element, which we can see in some of his later paintings, wouldn't you say?
I think also, because I don't know whether all Gibraltarians feel this, that because we come from a small place, we are maybe not good enough, or so we measure ourselves against people outside Gibraltar. And he, I think at this moment, was doubting his skill and was doubting himself as an artist, and was he good enough, and how he was going to progress. So that was another important transition as an artist, when he gained confidence and belief, because the other people around him were also in the same predicament, and they're all learning at the same time. And he always said, you know, I'm never going to stop learning. I'm always painting, I'm always delving, and that's something that I think made him a true artist in that sense, because he never thought he had arrived.
Did your lives, creative lives, run in parallel, would you say?
We were always having discussions. Obviously, he was a big influence because he supported me wholeheartedly when I said, could I become a dancer? Could I go to study? Which in 1979 was unheard of as well in Gibraltar. Nowadays, I'm happy to say that everybody's dancing and everybody's creative. So he was obviously a big influence musically as well. Every Sunday we used to come back from Mass and listen to music. So that was another important phase, because maybe my friends wouldn't listen to classical music or different music, even jazz. So he had an array of that knowledge as well. So in the art center, I would go early to do my own class and training, and he would be painting. And then we would have, say, 11:30, we'll have to have a coffee. And we would both discuss what we had been doing, and discuss philosophy, discuss ideas. Why are we here? What are we doing? So that was a very close bond that I had with him, apart from being my dad.
A beautiful relationship there, no doubt. Now, if we can move to this painting over here, because you talked there about mood, and I think this painting certainly encapsulates, you know, a certain mood, the evening light in the bay, which is the title of this piece, dated 1978. Already we're seeing here the rooftops, which was, you know, very much the trademark of Mario and his painting. We've seen them perhaps being, you know, depicted in so many different ways. But here there's something very much atmospheric, you know, with the light and the way that we're seeing, you know, the clouds and that reflection on the sea. Do you remember your dad actually working on this one?
He worked on this view many times, because it was the actual view of my grandmother's, my mum's mother, terrace and lavadero, which it became his art studio. So he lived in Flat Bastion Road, and my mum lived just there opposite the Sacred Heart. So this was a poignant view, because it's a view that he would see almost every day when he went up to paint. So I think it reflects maybe what he would be thinking, maybe what he would be yearning for. The iconic cathedral, you can see the lavanderias there as well, and the clothes hanging, which was very typical of our lifestyle.
Exactly.
So I think it shows, and our beautiful bay, of course. So I think that maybe he was reflecting on that mood of maybe traveling again, because this was in 1978. In 1979 is when he then did an in-service a year out in Goldsmiths College. So maybe he was already thinking that he needed to re-study or revisit and be around other artists to study. I think it was silk screen printing and other genres that he was teaching the girls at A-level.
And Paulette, I've got to pick up on one point there. In fact, both yourself and your dad shared some time in the UK at the same university. So how interesting for you both.
Yes, when I wanted to maybe spread my wings and have my own checkbook and my independence, Dad got an in-service course at Goldsmiths College, and Laban, which is where I went to, Laban, which is now Trinity Laban, was affiliated to Goldsmiths College. So whilst he was doing his research, I was in my first year studying dance. So we used to meet at the refectory, and people were like, "You're meeting your father," and you're meeting your daughter, which was very unusual, but very fun as well. So we shared that year even like in the same college or university, so that was quite special.
And Paulette, would you say perhaps there was an evident change in your dad's work after that year in the UK? I mean, you also mentioned their music once again. So how much would you say this played a part in sort of his creative process?
I think he became more involved in figurative painting and also printing because he was studying techniques. In terms of music, because we were in London and I was fortunate to be there with him, we went to a lot of operas, we went to a lot of ballets, we availed ourselves of the opportunity of going to see so much theatre. Obviously, in terms of finance, it was difficult, but at that stage we didn't want to miss any opportunity. So I was also instructed by him in terms of visiting galleries, of going to Cork Street, going to other places which I would have never done had I not been there with him at the same time.
Let's go and have a look at some of his later work. This is one of my favorites. It's one of the works that always stands out when we're doing the school tours. The children seem to like it. I think the fact that there's such contrasting shades and we can see so many of Gibraltar's landmarks. I think that's one of the things that are really prominent. Obviously we've got the cathedral there, the Moorish castle, the rock itself, the green shutters, and I think we sussed out that was the facade of the Theatre Royal.
I think so, because you know he was again also passionate about that building, and historically in his childhood, his great-grandfather was the person that played the piano when the silent films were on.
Wow!
So
another link there as well.
The music goes back to our family. I think it's quite vibrant. I think he'd reached this like moment of like not comfort, but like I think he was being very bold with the color contrast and using it almost seems to me like it's winter and summer at the same time in the contrasting.
Day and night, not the cool with the warm shades, definitely.
The shutters, very iconic also to his childhood and to Gibraltar, and in the sort of like Italian style architecture and influence. The castle, as we said before, still the rooftops, still the azoteas.
Yes.
So
would you say we're seeing a much more experimental nature here as well? Because I'm seeing sort of different elements and styles kind of coming through.
See, because you can see of the like cubist element, but also the offset. And I think maybe a reason why maybe, as you said before, the children maybe enjoy it, it's because it's like looking at it when you're tiny and you're looking at it from the side, it may tilt to your own vision. So maybe that's what he was, looking at things from different perspectives and angles.
And Paulette, something quite different in comparison. This one dates 2004. The studio, and it's probably one of those still lives that would have been created by your father at the art centre. Even I can remember these kind of setups when I danced many, many moons ago now.
Yeah. See, this would be in his, he painted in different parts of the art centre, but then he made this particular space his studio. So this would be where he set up his still lifes, or this is actually a still life of his actual materials, like his brushes, and then we still have that bust there, and his tools. So I think it's quite interesting because he's bringing like maybe what the artist uses as materials in a work of art
itself
per se as well. So maybe that's quite.
And I think in this
unusual.
one, certainly a study of light, wouldn't you say? He's really using the actual objects and working with those shadows, the brightness, the yellow tones, again, those golden and bluish tones, which are quite evident in his work. If we go back to the light in the bay, we can see it sort of being brought into a different subject matter. But
he was always delving into the idea of how light changes objects or landscapes. because he was also a very good photographer, also delved in photography. He had a little dark room in the old Loreto school when he was teaching there in the convent. So, you know, he was passionate about that as well. So almost like a scientist as well. So he was very, very curious about everything and inquisitive about how things worked and how light, you know, even in design, in everything we do in theatre as well, plays a big part.
And interesting, I think, to see here the drips of the paint, you know, an effect that he's wanted to leave in as well.
Yes, I think he got to a stage, you know, as you get older, where your confidence rises and you don't, you know, oh, is this finished, or have I arrived at, because sometimes you never know if a painting is finished or not, and you can spoil it or do too much. And I think maybe at that stage he'd achieved maybe what he wanted. He was very critical always of those things, and very well known for painting on top of paintings and on the back of paintings, because obviously material was expensive. Yes. So, you know, as he got older, obviously he could afford more things, but in a lot of the works that we have in the art center, there's pictures and paintings on both sides of canvases.
And here we have two examples of rooftops depicted in very different ways, even though we can see the cubist element in both of them. If you can start off with these sepia rooftops, obviously the title telling us very much the focus with regards to the colour, you know, working with those tones, that palette. But the depiction itself of those rooftops, of those buildings, much more stripped back, yes, going to basics, you know, simpler in its forms.
I mean, it's simplistic in a way in the canvas, but I think in his mind, to be able to then transpose the line and the specific line that would tell you this is another rooftop is
much more complex.
Is the complexity. And obviously I think maybe he challenged himself into using a much smaller array of color in the sepia. So that might have been a task that he set himself, and maybe still had the warmth of the colors of our rooftops.
And I think it actually works, that relationship between the colors and the form and the composition working very well, and challenging the viewer as well, I think. And no doubt, again, bringing into play these shades, which would be very much commonplace in, you know, Gibraltar's traditional skyline, if we look at the upper town and the old town and so on.
And still, I think the idea of the light that we were talking about before, when he's putting the white or leaving the white as to draw us into the different shapes and offset the perspective and the different dimensions. And
something quite different here, a south view, so a different part of Gibraltar, which perhaps wasn't as common or didn't feature as commonly in your father's works, but definitely an interesting, with you know, Rosia Bay and Parsons Lodge.
That's right. Yes, he was always looking at different ways of depicting his love of Gibraltar. So again, when I was talking about the photography, maybe he went up the rock, took this view and thought, maybe I can delve into something that he hadn't studied as much as maybe the cathedral or the bay view. And also we can see a completely different palette here, and maybe almost a bit more subdued color schemes to what I think maybe we were used to. So I suppose it does reflect maybe the mood he was in that particular moment
or So Paulette, a big thank you for having you here today. For us, it's a pleasure, and you know, we hope this serves as a legacy towards your father's work and passion and love of art throughout the years, because no doubt he's certainly left his mark on Gibraltar's artistic scene, not only through his offering and all those works he's leaving behind, but through his influences and how he continues to influence and have an impact on artists working at the moment.
Absolutely. Yes, so thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope people enjoy it.